Hello, everyone. My name is Michael Steinhardt. I'm the technology editor here at Red Ventures, ZDNet, and we're proud to present Ransomware Today, What's New and How to Protect Your Organization. This webcast is sponsored by Cloudian. Now, the title really says it all, and I'm excited to hear from our expert speakers today. We have security analyst Graham Cluley and Cloudian CMO John Tour. Let me tell you just a little bit about our expert speakers. Graham is an award-winning independent security blogger, researcher, podcaster, and public speaker. He's been a well-known figure in the security industry since the early 90s, and he's also held senior roles at companies such as Sophos and McAfee. He's a sought-after consultant for law enforcement, and he appears regularly on TV and radio explaining computer security threats. And of course, you can hear him on the Smashing Security podcast as well. And Graham can be located on Twitter at @gclueley. Now, John Tour is the CMO at Cloudian, and prior to that, he served as Vice President of Marketing at Brocade and also at Seago Systems, where he led the outbound marketing team for company launch all the way until the company acquisition by Oracle. So John holds an MBA and a BS in mechanical engineering and a BA in economics, all from Stanford University. So I think you'll agree that we've got the right speakers to cover this topic today. But before I pass the mic over, I'm just going to run over some very quick housekeeping items. This is an interactive presentation. So if you hit the Q&A button on your console, we'll send those questions in. They'll be queued up as they come in, and we'll do our best to answer those questions during a few minutes at the end of the presentation that are set aside for audience questions. If we don't get to your question, you can definitely look forward to a response via email. If you happen to be watching this on demand, please make sure to include a reply to email in your question so that we can get that response to you promptly. If you'd like more information about Cloudian, you can find additional resources under the aptly titled Related Resources widget, also appearing on the right of your viewing console. And with that, I'm going to pass the mic over to Graham.
Well, hello, and thank you, Michael, very much for that introduction. A splendid job. And greetings, world. It's a real pleasure to be here today to talk to you about the ghastly topic of ransomware. Not the most pleasant topic in the world, but something which I think we all need to certainly be aware of, those of us who are running businesses and trying to protect our data. Ransomware, of course, has become one of the big scourges in the world of cybersecurity in recent years. It gets onto your computer, often through a malicious link or an email attachment, and it'll look up your computer or your data in some fashion. And if you want to use your computer or to access your data again, well, you're going to have to come up with the cache. So it's a bit like an old-fashioned kidnapping or you're basically being held at gunpoint, and there aren't very many options at that point. But we'll be talking a little bit later about different ways in which you can protect yourself and recover from a ransomware attack as well. Many of you have probably already experienced a ransomware attack. Maybe ransomware has tried to infect your business computers. Maybe you've already fought off an infection or dealt with the aftermath. But the outcome is so often the same. The outcome is so often that once you've been hit by ransomware, you've effectively been locked out of your data. You're no longer able to access your data. Sometimes you're no longer able to log into your computers. And your data is very much the lifeblood of your organization. It's what's powered your business for years and years. It's allowed you to generate income. It's allowed you to create business relationships. If that data is taken away from you, if it's locked up by a ransomware attack, then that's a big problem, because you can no longer access information about your customers or your potential customers. You can't learn about your relationships. You can't work with that information. You can't maybe access information about your products and services. Imagine if all of that was gone in the blink of an eye and no longer accessible to you. That's bad enough on a personal level. But when it happens inside your corporation, it really can be catastrophic, because maybe you'll find you have to shut down your website. Maybe you have to turn off your email system. Maybe you're scrabbling around like a headless chicken thinking, what on earth are we going to do? Some companies tell their staff, look, don't log into your email. Don't try and turn on computers. If you need to communicate, set up a personal Yahoo account or Gmail account and use WhatsApp or some other messaging service to communicate because the business infrastructure is no longer accessible to you. So you've been locked out of your company, which is a horrendous situation to be in. Your IT team may insist that systems are shut down to prevent the ransomware from creating more carnage, and they're trying to limit its spread. Because everywhere the ransomware goes, it's grabbing your files, your Word documents, your databases, your presentations, your PDFs, and it's spitting them out the other side, encrypted and garbled, turned into useless gobbledygook because you don't have the secret key to unlock them. So you've been locked out of your company. It's like that, but these are locks which cannot be broken. So if someone physically came up to your building and locked the doors, you'd be able to get someone round with some bolt cutters. But it's not the case with ransomware, because ransomware, if it's written in a competent fashion, and sadly most ransomware is these days, it's not so easy to crack. You don't have the secret key to unlock your data. And what the criminals are saying is you've got to pay us a sizable ransom in untraceable cryptocurrency to recover the situation. So you could say that the clip art has well and truly hit the fan. When you turn on your computer and you see a message like this, here's a piece of ransomware, for instance, it says, "You hacked," I apologize for the poor grammar of ransomware gangs, "you hacked all data encrypted contacts," and it gives an email address, and then it says, "Enter a key to unlock your computer." So that's as far as you've got. Now, ransomware isn't really a new kid on the block. It's been around for some years now. And the reason why it works so incredibly well for cyber criminals, and so many cyber criminals are doing it, is they found it's a very successful way to defraud businesses out of cash. They know that many businesses will actually pay up. In some cases, the businesses may actually be prohibited by law from paying. But despite that, they sometimes will actually pay up the ransom in order to get their company up and running, because the worst thing in the world is to be running a company or an organization and having to say to the outside world, "Uh-oh, our website's no longer working, our services aren't available, we can't pay you your housing benefit," in the case of the council there, which has been hit, or there's obvious problems. This is one of the worst things about ransomware in a way. It's bad enough to be hit by a cyber attack, but then there is sometimes, rightly or wrongly, some shame in the public disclosure as well. It's not a message you can often carefully manage before it gets in front of the press. And that's particularly true of if you were to be, for instance, running an electronic billboard company. Maybe the billboards across the freeways. Here's a freeway in Thailand, which was hit by the WannaCry virus. And as you can see, the actual ransom demand is being displayed on electronic billboards above the motorway. So the impact can be considerable, and it can be embarrassing, and it can be headline news. These are some of the headlines just from the British press when the WannaCry ransomware worm spread around the world, making front page news in all of the tabloids, as well as the broadsheets and on the TV news as well. Global hack horror, hackers hold NHS to ransom, national hacked service, cyber hackers cripple the NHS. So huge impact which this kind of malware attack can have. And very, very public. And yet despite this, and despite the many, many attacks that have happened over the years, still seems to catch many organizations really unawares. Take, for instance, the city of Baltimore. And what happened with them is in May 2019, Baltimore was hit with a ransomware attack. They were hit by a piece of ransomware called Robin Hood. But it wasn't a good guy hanging out in Sherwood Forest. This was Robin Hood in its true criminal fortune, not giving to the poor after stealing from the rich. It was just putting into the pockets of the rich cyber criminals. The Robin Hood gang orchestrated the attack, which exploited known software vulnerabilities and knocked out a majority of the city's servers, crippled many of its applications. And the attackers demanded 13 bitcoins, which I think at the time was about $78,000. It'd actually be more now because bitcoins in recent weeks have the price has really soared. But they demanded 13 bitcoins for the safe return of Baltimore's data, the secret keys which would unlock the data and allow them to get back up and running again. And what these ransomware attackers did, which sadly is a technique and tactic that we see often, is they threatened that every day that passed would see the ransom increase until they said, if you leave it for 10 days, then the data will no longer be available at all. So you effectively have a ticking clock taking place here. I've seen some ransomware in the past where they infect your system and they say every hour that you take, we're going to permanently wipe 2 of your files. So we're going to start zapping your files so you will never be able to recover them. So you have to pay quickly. It's a little bit like taking a group of people hostage and say we're going to shoot a hostage every 3 hours. Unless you pay up, it suddenly raises the stakes. Well, in the case of the attack against Baltimore, the message which people received was this: we've been watching you for days and we've worked on your systems to gain full access to your company and bypass all of your protections. We won't talk more. All we know is money. Hurry up, tick-tack, tick-tack, tick-tack. Again, emphasizing the clicking and ticking of the clock. Now, this wasn't the city of Baltimore's first run-in with ransomware. It turns out they'd actually been hit the previous year as well. Their 911 dispatch system was taken offline by a ransomware attack. Unfortunately, after a member of staff, he misconfigured a firewall for an hour or two, and that was the window of opportunity for that particular group of hackers to gain access and infect the system. So they'd had problems in the past, and you would like to think that lessons had been learnt as a result. And yes, by the time of this second attack, Baltimore did have in place a backup strategy to ensure that they could recover if they got hit by ransomware. And in fact, Baltimore's mayor, who you can see in this picture, and the head of IT, they said that they had no plans at all. They were not planning to negotiate with the extortionists. They were not going to pay up. There's no way they were going to pay the ransom because they had had the foresight to ensure that a backup system was in place. So all's good, right? No problems. Well, it's not quite that simple, because what form did their backup take? Had they decided to put their backup, I don't know, on a separate device securely stored at a remote location? No, they had not. Had they decided to put their backups of their important data in the cloud and hold it securely up there and keeping it out of the paws and claws of the ransomware attackers? No, they had not. Had they instead created a folder on the hard drives of their computers and simply copied the data into that backup folder? Yes, they had. So I believe the technical term for this is quack, quack, oops. Obviously, this isn't a proper backup. Yes, you've copied the data, but you've left it on the same physical drive, which means, of course, it's just be as at risk of a hard disk failure or a fire or a flood or something like that. But also, it meant that when the ransomware hit the drive, it had no problems whatsoever also encrypting the backup copy. So you need to have a proper backup. And a proper backup is one which you can turn to in a moment of crisis, one you can easily recover your files from. A proper backup should be remote, it should be secure, it should be strongly encrypted, not accessible by criminals, but be accessible by yourself to prevent it from falling into the wrong hands. The city of Baltimore made the mistake of thinking it was prepared, but it wasn't. And this ransomware attack against the city of Baltimore, it cost it over $18 million, which is obviously quite a lot of money. That was exacerbated by the absence of data backups. The the failure to have proper disaster recovery plans in place. And you have to say that in retrospect, the $78,000 which had been demanded by the ransomware attackers begins to look like a bit of a bargain. And financially, at least, let's not look at the ethics and morality right at this moment, but financially, at least, that seems like quite a good deal. And maybe that would have been a more sensible take. Now, obviously, just paying a ransom isn't the end of the story, because you have to recognize the attackers got in somehow. They exploited a vulnerability, whether it was a human weakness or social engineering or some software vulnerability, to gain access to your computers and plant the ransomware in the first place. So even if you've recovered your data and got up and running again, you want to make sure that the attackers can't get back in. But there's millions and millions being spent by companies in response to a ransomware attack, trying to get back up and running. And who knows how much money is lost because of lost business and people who no longer want to do work with you in future and no longer want to partner with you. So it's better to be prepared in the first place. So when faced with these kind of costs, you can understand why many organizations choose to pay their ransomware attackers. And we see attacks over and over again, sometimes against public institutions, sometimes it will be against medical organizations, it may be transport organizations, and millions of dollars are in some cases being demanded by the hackers. Generally, the prices appear to be going up. So when faced with these kind of costs and this kind of risk, I can understand why some organizations are debating, maybe they should pay up, maybe they should do something. But should you pay the ransom? That's the question. Well, the answer to that is very, very clear if you speak to these chaps, the FBI, of course. And what the FBI say is, well, they obviously don't, they say you shouldn't pay if you can at all avoid it. They don't advocate paying for the ransom. They say, for one thing, it's not a guarantee that you'll be able to regain access to your data. You may just be flushing your money down the lavatory. In some cases, they say victims who paid the ransom never got the decryption keys. I have to say, in my experience, most of the time, businesses who do pay do actually get the decryption keys, and normally they do work. I think the reason for that is these ransomware attacks are being run as a business, and it's bad for the image of your criminal business if you don't follow through and deliver the goods. And so they don't want everyone to know that the XYZ ransomware never provides the decryption key. And so if they've been paid, often they will provide it, although they may go on to infect you again. The FBI also says that sometimes there will be bugs in the ransomware, which mean that you can't recover your data even with the decryption key. And that's true. There are bugs in ransomware. Ransomware is written by humans, programmers, and humans make mistakes. So that certainly is the case. So you have to be in a pretty desperate position, I think, to place your trust in criminals. These are people who've already revealed themselves to have loose morals, to be untrustworthy, to have no qualms about breaking the law, exploiting a situation for their own financial advantage. But the companies and organizations who find themselves in the middle of this kind of attack are often desperate. And there's one other reason why the FBI tell you not to pay a ransom, and that's this. They say that paying a ransom actually encourages other attacks, and that is true. We've seen this huge swelling of ransomware. As a sector of cyber attack, it's one of the most common attacks and one of the most successful types of attack. And so criminals who used to be engaged in other attacks, like, phishing, for instance, or regular malware attacks, are increasingly adopting ransomware techniques simply because they've seen, that's how we make the greenbacks. That's a good way for us to do it. So you've got to be careful about these things, and some people will have to make the difficult decision as to whether they want to pay or not. I certainly agree with the FBI. If no one ever paid the ransom, there wouldn't be any more ransomware attacks because they simply wouldn't do that. They'd be pursuing some other area of cybercrime instead. So the more we make cybercrime profitable, that will encourage more cybercrime to occur. So we want to be like that. But at the same time, we want to be realistic. There's no sign that ransomware attacks are going to stop anytime soon. And there are some organizations who will feel that they have literally no choice but to make the painful decision to pay their attacker. Now, attached to that comes some stigma. When word gets out that you've paid your ransom, it's not unusual for companies actually to be trolled even, sometimes by the cybersecurity community on Twitter and on social media. They may be mocked. They may be moaned at, saying, well, you've encouraged more attacks by paying up. So some organizations don't want to be seen to be given in to the attackers. They might not choose to want to pay up directly, but they may not have any method of recovering any other way. So they think we have to pay them, but we don't want to be seen to be doing it. And that's when we enter this really murky world. There is an unusual byproduct of this ransomware crime era that we're living through, which has seen third-party firms offer to unlock your encrypted files without you having to pay the cyber criminals. Often these companies will present themselves as data recovery experts or encryption experts, and they say, well, look, we can analyze the ransomware which has attacked your computers, and we can decrypt your files. We will work out a way of doing it. Often, the amount that these companies will charge you is actually more than the ransomware criminals are charging you. But at least you can feel like, well, we haven't paid the criminals, and we haven't, encouraged further attacks and assisted criminals who may then attack others. So let's use third-party experts as well. Well, I've got a bit of a revelation here, which is how some of these data recovery firms work. Some of them work like this. So there you are. You're the victim. You've very unfortunately had your network encrypted and your data locked up by a ransomware attack. And so you pay money to a recovery firm to unlock your files. So they take the money, and what do they do with it? They go to the ransomware gang, and they say, hey, we understand you're after some money from XYZ Inc. because you hit them with ransomware. We'll pay you. You give us the decrypted files or the decryption key. And so that's what they do. They just act as a middleman. So they get the decryption key. You as the victim had nothing to do with the criminals. You may turn a blind eye even if you hadn't realized it. You may be completely oblivious to what your recovery firm is doing. But of course, the recovery firm is making a markup. They're making some more money than the attacker actually made. So they're skimming off some of this money. It's a very curious and strange world, and ethically somewhat dubious in my mind. But there are firms who are doing this. If you go to their websites, they claim to use the latest technology in their own data recovery methods, but in fact, some of them are just paying the attackers instead. So it's quite interesting. There are complications with doing this, however. One thing to consider is that, for instance, in the United States, the authorities have actually put some ransomware gangs. There's one, for instance, called Evil Corps, running out of Russia. And they are their bosses are on official sanctions lists run by the US government. So any company transferring money to those criminal organizations are technically in breach of sanctions. So these recovery firms may be doing something rather dodgy instead. Okay, let's look at some of the ransomware, because ransomware is not static. It changes, it evolves over time. New techniques are being used. You could argue that ransomware doesn't really need to evolve that much because it's always been highly effective at screwing money out of companies. But the truth is that changes have occurred from time to time. Sometimes changes can be quite subtle. Sometimes they demonstrate quite a lot of ingenuity, I think, on the part of the attacker as well. So let me just give you a couple of examples of ransomware which has piqued my interest in time. Here is an example of some ransomware. It's called Popcorn Time. And when Popcorn Time triggers and it displays its ransom note, it gives you the usual message about, hey, this is how you pay us some cryptocurrency to get your data back. Here's how you transfer it into our Bitcoin wallet. But they say, but if you don't want to do that, if you don't want to spend any money to recover your data, or if it's too hard for you to work out how to get hold of some Bitcoin, there's a nasty way to restore your files. And what they're doing is they're giving you a link, and they're saying, if you share this link with other people, and they install the file at the end of that link and get infected by our ransomware, and subsequently pay up as well, then we'll give you your data back for free. So congratulations, you are now an affiliate of a ransomware gang. So they have effectively recruited you by infecting your computer with ransomware. So if you don't want to pay up, join the gang. And of course, you've also just created a criminal act, and you could end up in a lot of trouble by infecting people. But you can imagine there might be some people who would be tempted by this. Sometimes we see situations inside companies where people don't want to have to tell the IT team that they've made a mistake in their computer security, and they may actually want, so once their computer has been infected, maybe they might actually want to infect other computers in the same organization, because if 50 computers are infected, they might think, well, that doesn't put my job at risk. Whereas if it's just my computer, I might be frowned upon for my behavior. So extraordinary thing. Something else which we're seeing more and more of course, targeted attacks, whereas rather than trying to infect many companies or home users all at once, a determined attacker might specifically focus on one victim. And what they may do in those cases is create ransomware tailored for a specific corporate victim's environment. And some of the ransomware attacks which have really done the most damage and demanded the most money have used techniques like that. So some of the big attacks which you're seeing now may have been conducted over many weeks and months of surveillance by the criminals, effectively mapping out the infrastructure and the network inside the organization to understand it and grabbing all the data necessary. In some cases, they may even be targeting the company's chief executives because they're likely to have the most sensitive information, the intellectual property, targeting the information on those people's computers above other information as well in order to tighten the pressure. And sometimes the techniques can be quite sneaky as well. I think a lot of us are understanding of the idea of ransomware arriving via an email attachment or a malicious link. And so you might be suspicious of an unsolicited email. You know, you may have quite rightly trained your staff to be suspect of that. But what happens when you're a school, for instance? We saw this attack where an infection was coming in, and the first that most people knew about it, the first interaction which the school had with the ransomware attacker was a phone call coming in to the secretary of the school, saying, hello, this is the Department of Education here. Could you tell your head teacher that we are sending them some files from the Department of Education, some forms which they need to open up and fill out and return back to us? And so the secretary speaks to the head teacher, says, you've got an email coming through from the Department of Education which needs to be returned today as a matter of priority. That's no longer an unexpected, unsolicited email. That's one you were expecting. And boom, when you open the email, open up the zip file, you infect your school with ransomware as a result. So there are targeted attacks. We've seen targeted attacks by ransomware like Locker against companies like Campari, the video game company Capcom as well. And more, we are seeing one significant development, which is that the ransomware attackers are stealing data. They're not just encrypting it, they're exfiltrating it from your servers before any files are encrypted in the attack. This is stealthy, it's silent, it's stealing your company's sensitive files. And the reason why they're doing this is, again, to tighten the thumb screws, put more pressure on you to pay the ransom, because they're saying, you don't just have to pay us money for the decryption key, but if you don't pay us money, we are going to release the stolen data into the wild, data about your customers, your business plans, your partners, unless you meet our demands. So that's pretty nasty. The criminals are even, in some cases, running news websites announcing their latest victims who haven't paid up, which is quite a problem. One gang which was doing this is a gang called Maze, And the Maze ransomware gang looks like a regular ransomware attack at first, but as victims found out, such as this French construction company who were hit by Maze, the hackers actually stole vast amounts of data, in this case over 1,000 terabytes of data from hundreds of computers stolen from the organization. So the theft of data is ongoing. It's then being made available on the dark web. So this was Maze's website, where they were listing what they called their clients. By clients, they really meant victims. But if the victims declined to negotiate or declined to pay up, they got listed on this website, which meant that you could, if you want, download all of the data from, in this case, all of the data from that French construction company, which was hit. And the ransomware gangs, they've got no qualms at all about who they might infect. So they don't care if it's a hospital, they don't care if it's medical researchers. And sometimes we actually get to see their negotiations as well. We get to spy upon them as they actually chat. Some of these guys actually have online chat systems where you can chat with them about how much money you're going to offer them, and they laugh in your face. And so you've got a couple of hours and you're going to have to do a lot better than that. In this particular case, the ransomware gang are saying, keep your $780,000 to buy some McDonald's for your employees. It is a very small amount for us. So you're going to have to be made of some strong stuff to face up to these organized criminals. But sometimes people do, and they're the ones I'm impressed with. Here's someone who took a stand against ransomware. This lady, Hilda Arsheim, she was appointed the CEO of a company called Norsk Hydro on March the 18th, 2019. This was their announcement on Twitter. Norsk Hydro is a company which is multinational and employs 35,000 people around the world. The very next day, basically her first day of work, what happens? This happens. Norsk Hydro under cyber attack. And their staff were told they couldn't use their computer systems, their email systems, while the issue was trying to be resolved. And with their website down and their email systems down, they turned to social media to communicate with their customers and partners. But what I love about Norsk Hydro is they refused to negotiate. The gang who hacked Norsk Hydro and planted the ransomware must have thought that they'd hit the mother lode. They must have thought that they were in for a big payday. They would have spent weeks, maybe months, infecting that organization and learning about its systems and how to do the maximum damage. And they were probably expecting a reply from Norsk Hydro. But Norsk Hydro never got in touch with them. They refused point blank to negotiate, and they became an example for businesses around the world about how to respond to an attack and improve your image. Because what you can do is, sure, you can have some drama going on, but it doesn't have to be a crisis. You can actually turn these things around. Sometimes there's an opportunity when something bad happens to your company to actually get more brand loyalty by being open, by being transparent. And I would urge you to go and read more about what Norsk Hydro did and the way they communicated with their customers and partners very, very openly, and the hard work which they put in, a real example for all of us. But sometimes, sadly, the attacks are getting particularly personal. For instance, we have seen a number of attacks and ransomware attacks against plastic surgery companies and cosmetic surgery companies, where, having been infected by ransomware, the attackers actually steal sensitive information, such as before and after photographs of people who were having cosmetic surgery. You know, some of them obviously involving nudity, patient notes, and so forth. And what happens in these cases is that the attackers say, we're not just encrypting your files, we're also going to be releasing images of your patients as well onto the internet in order to cause maximum embarrassment to you unless you pay up. So ransomware can be really nasty, and it can impact your customers quite directly as well and cause them significant concerns. So what of the future when it comes to ransomware? Well, I think we're going to see more ransomware affecting smartphones and mobile devices. As the world goes more and more into mobile devices, and as we rely more upon smartphones and our tablets for our everyday internet use, it only makes sense that we will see more attacks targeting them. We have seen some already, but most of the attacks at the moment are happening on regular workstations and laptops, desktop PCs, instead of smartphones. But I'm sure that we will see more in the future. And if you imagine the tension that you feel when you leave the house or leave the office and you realize that, oh, I don't have my phone on me, what am I going to do? Well, imagine that same kind of fear when your smartphone device has been locked by ransomware, so you can no longer access it. So there's some very nasty tricks which can be done there, and we've seen in the past. I think as well, we will see more ransomware attacks affecting IoT devices. So things like your printer, maybe your CCTV camera, your television, maybe even your car, because these are all computers, right? Okay, a car is just a computer with wheels these days, isn't it? It's the ultimate mobile device. But all of these other devices have computers in them, and it isn't necessarily as easy to recover them and get them back up and running as it might be to recover your regular laptop computer or your desktop computer. So I think we will see more attacks like this. And imagine the impact which can be caused if you have a business which is only has IoT-style light bulbs, for instance, or is reliant upon IoT technology. If that is bricked by a ransomware attack, that's going to cause more and more problems. I just saw a proof of concept just a few weeks ago of a ransomware attack affecting coffee machines, where you can imagine the damage which can be done if you can't get proper cup of coffee in the office. But joking aside, it could be made to squirt hot water over people, or even keep the grinder going continually to such an extent that eventually the motor would wear out or a fire would actually be started. So all kinds of problems which could be caused by an attack, which basically holds your IoT devices hostage. And also, I think there's a risk that ransomware begins to threaten to lock up your actual PC hardware. So there is a chip, it's rather like an old-fashioned BIOS chip, a UEFI chip. It's the low-level software that's used to manage the boot process on your PC. And if ransomware manages to brick that, that is not an easy thing to fix without a hardware fix, without actually crowbarring the chip maybe off the computer. Your computer won't necessarily be able to do anything if that kind of thing happens. So very, very disruptive, particularly for organizations. Well, having now scared the bejesus out of you, let's talk about some of the ways in which you can defend yourself as well. So I would strongly recommend prevention.
Hi, this is Michael Steinhardt. Just wanted to find out whether Graham dropped off. John, perhaps you might want to advance to your section, and we'll see whether Graham can rejoin us shortly.
Okay, let's go ahead and do that. Sorry about that, folks. This is John Tour from Claudian. So hope we haven't been infected by ransomware in our presentation here, but maybe it's a real-time example. What Graham was just getting to was, how do you defend yourself? And there's lots of different ways to protect yourself, from perimeter defenses to training your employees to be wary of phishing emails, to really defending the internal systems with antivirus software. The reality is, though, that every single one of those can be defeated, and ultimately probably will be, because the ransomware attackers only have to succeed one time to break through on your systems and wreak havoc. And that's really the bottom line of this. The majority of ransomware attacks actually happen to people who do have perimeter defenses in place. So Claudian is a software storage company. We store data, and we sell scalable modular systems. But what's really exciting about this is these systems, interestingly, have now evolved to the point where they're actually amazingly effective protection against ransomware. And this is something that's just happened in the last few years. The storage systems now have protection in place that can prevent your data from being encrypted and thereby protect you from ransomware. And really what I'm talking about here is a storage system which is used as a data protection target. As Graham mentioned, keeping a copy of your backup data in a secure place is really the last best defense against ransomware, because having that backup copy is your insurance policy, right? You may suffer some downtime of systems for a short period of time, but you have a copy of data you can restore from that is uninfected. And that's really what we're all about. So what's happened in the last year is that storage companies such as Cloudian and backup providers such as Veeam and Rubrik have created an infrastructure where data can be stored to these devices like Cloudian and made immutable, unchangeable, and therefore impervious to ransomware attacks. If you cannot change the data, you can't encrypt the data. And if you can't encrypt the data, then ransomware is ineffective. And the beauty is that now the software companies such as Veeam and Commvault work in conjunction with storage like ours to make this happen as part of your normal backup process. So this isn't something you manage separately. This isn't something you have to do manual intervention to invoke. It's something that can happen as a part of your day-to-day life every day, every time you do a backup, every time you do an incremental, that protection is automatically put in place, and the old copies that have been locked previously are automatically managed. So this is a tremendous step forward from the old days where you would have to make a copy of your data on tape and then take that tape to a location that's away from the library. That requires a lot of manual intervention. This requires zero manual intervention. It's something that happens every day. And really what this is based on is immutable storage, or worm storage, as we used to call it, write once, read many. So you can write once, and then after that you can't write anymore to that particular volume. And what it does is it makes those backup data copies unchangeable for a given period of time. And this is a feature called object lock. And object lock is just that. It's a lock like a time lock on a bank vault. You put the data in there, you set the time lock, and then for whatever period that time lock has been set, the data can't be changed. So even if an attacker gets in, just like even if a bank robber gets into the bank, they still can't get at the data, just like they can't get into the bank vault, because the time lock has been set. And ultimately, that time lock will expire. It will time out to the time you have set. But of course, during that time, you have written other subsequent copies that you know to be clean to give yourself, you always have multiple copies to restore from. So the way the process works is very straightforward. You back up your data using one of these, software packages like Veeam or Commvault, the common ones that are used by just about everybody. The backup software itself then applies that policy, the object lock policy, which means that backup copy is now protected for 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, whatever period you want, where you're going to be making new copies in that interim. During that time, ransomware cannot change the data. And so if you get hit by a ransomware attack during that time, you have a clean copy available for restore. It is just as easy as going in and restoring your data in the normal way using the same backup software you used to protect it, just that now you're assured that copy is clean. And in fact, the backup software, most of the software has the ability to go in and actually inspect that data to make sure you're not restoring data that has ransomware embedded in it. So you can go back to your most recent copy and see if that's clean. Maybe it's been infected and you have to go to a little bit older copy. You can go back as far in time as you need to go to get a clean copy so you're not restoring ransomware into your environment. It's clean, it's simple, it's automated, it's hands-free, and therefore that means it's error-free. And that's a really important part of this. Now, of course, the question you should ask is, that's great, you're storing it on this device, but how do I know the device itself is secure? Because if the device can be penetrated, that it's meaningless. And the reality is we've gone through extensive security certifications on this device to not only protect it from ransomware from external sources, but even from tampering by internal folks. So we have common criteria certification, we have FIP certification. This has been certified by the SEC as storage for financial records, which by law cannot be changed. Financial records and healthcare records have to be protected from change, and we've been certified under the rules that verify that. What this means is that the data is not only protected from ransomware encryption, but it's also protected by internal tampering. So even if someone inside the company wanted to go in and was able to gain physical access to the device, unless they start actually going after it with a screwdriver, they're not going to be able to change the data. But if they just plug into a management port or get in through some other management logins, the data is still protected. And we had to verify that to get these certifications. Now, another question that's come up in the question boxes here is, what about data that is not being encrypted, but is in fact being exfiltrated? What about the data that is not being held ransom, but is actually being taken outside the company, and then they threaten to release it? Well, we can protect you there too, because encryption, in whatever form of encryption you want to use, is also built into the device. So you can store your data encrypted and then protect it from further encryption as a part of the normal process. So you're protected not only from ransomware, but you're also protected from the exfiltration that Graham mentioned. This has been proven in enterprise environments. We have 550 customers worldwide, enterprise customers that are now using Cloudian systems. Data protection is the #1 use case, and we ranked highest in the Gartner Critical Capabilities report as the most effective device for data protection, analytics, archive, and cloud storage applications. And the amazing thing about this is that not only is it the most effective way of protecting yourself from ransomware as your last best defense, it's also amazingly cost effective. The ransomware, the software, the backup software is now included in standard packages like Veeam and Commvault. And the device itself, the Cloudian device, actually costs a fraction of what you would pay for traditional enterprise storage devices or public cloud storage, down to about one half cent per gigabyte per month. So not only can you protect yourself in the most effective way possible with security certifications that verify that this is going to be solid and also validated by the leading analysts, it's also the most cost-effective way of storing your data. And it's scalable, so you can scale to store whatever volume of data you're talking about. We've got customers that are now approaching an exabyte of data under Cloudian management. So it's simple, cost-effective, highly scalable, very easy to use, and most importantly, provides ransomware protection as part of an ongoing backup process. So it's error-free. With that, I think we've got some questions, so I'll turn it back over to Michael to take us through those.
Thank you so much. That's John Tour, CMO of Cloudian. And right before we do turn to the audience questions, I do want to pass the microphone back to Graham Cluley for a moment. Graham had some technical difficulties because why not? It's 2021 and that's what happens. But please do take us out, Graham, with some closing remarks, and then we'll definitely jump onto the Q&A. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that, guys. I'm not quite sure what happened, but I think there's a yogurt pot between Great Britain and America, and the piece of string that we're meant to keep specially taut between the two yogurt pots maybe got a little bit loose, and that's why the connection was lost briefly there. But I'd almost finished anyway. I just wanted to say to you, there are obviously defenses which you can put in place to avoid getting infected by ransomware in the first place, like security software, antivirus, firewalls, behavior blocking. Obviously, it makes sense to follow best practices when it comes to passwords as well, making sure that passwords are unique and strong and not easy to be cracked and not commonly used. And so that makes it more difficult for criminals to make their way around your network and break into accounts. Using multi-factor authentication is a good idea as well, to make sure that the people accessing your systems really are the people you think that they are, patching against vulnerabilities, and of course encrypting your sensitive data. But one point I really wanted to make was don't wait until a hacker comes along and finds out what your crown jewels are inside your organization and what your most precious data is and how to access it. Why not be the hacker yourself? Why not try and penetration test your own network, obviously with permission and the knowledge of your colleagues, but why not try and find those weaknesses before a hacker begins to try and break into you? But most of all, don't panic. And of course, as John has just been describing, the real answer to ransomware has got to be, and not just for ransomware, but for other reasons as well, to have proper, secure backups, protecting your data, protecting your information so that it can't be easily exploited and can't be easily compromised by malicious hackers. So I'm terribly sorry that the last minute or two of my presentation was knocked out briefly, but I think probably, Michael, we're ready to go for questions and things now.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Graham. And with apologies to the audience for the skipping around, I think that Graham's closing remarks are definitely a great jumping off point to learn about the features and benefits of Cloudian solutions. But Graham, while you're still on the line, I want to direct the first question that came in from the audience to you. Should all ransomware be reported to national authorities? This is in the EU, but I imagine the FBI is what you mentioned earlier as a data breach. So are these required to be disclosed as such?
Yeah, well, it will depend on your territory and where you are in the world, the specifics, and sometimes it's state by state regarding the size and the type of data which might have been breached. But as a general rule, I think, yes, it should be disclosed to the authorities, not only for data protection regulations, to speak to the regulators and make sure that the customers and those who may have been exposed by the data breach are properly warned, but also for the cybercrime investigation. Because although the criminals behind ransomware attacks are not caught as often as we would like, we do need to collect information about what they are doing, the communications that they're making, the people that they are infecting, because sometimes criminal gangs make mistakes and sometimes they leave clues lying around. And if you don't tell the police, if you don't tell the FBI or whoever it is in your particular country, then that data isn't going to be properly collected and won't be able to be used in the future in a criminal case against some of the miscreants who are perpetrating these attacks.
All right. Well, thank you for that insight. John, we have another question that I think pertains specifically to the Cloudian feature set. But can I use Cloudian storage to protect my data other than backup? And if so, how?
The answer is yes, absolutely. Backup data is particularly good because obviously it's something that ransomware attackers target first. They look for the backup systems because they know that that's your greatest vulnerability. If you don't have a backup copy that's uninfected, you're basically toast. But absolutely, you can protect other data as well. The object lock feature is worm. It's write once, read many, immutable storage. So once the data is written into a folder that has been object lock enabled, that data is protected from encryption or deletion or overwriting for whatever period of time you set. And you can write any data into that folder. You can create as many folders as you want, and that data is protected for as long as you want. The only caveat is that if you're doing it that way, obviously you're managing the process yourself, which is fine. If you have a set of data you want to protect for a period of years, write it into that folder. You're good to go. The advantage of the backup data is that process is now managed completely in an automated way, including overwrite, having folders time out, deleting them, and having new copies available at all times. So yes, you can absolutely protect anything manually. The backup data protection is automated.
Sounds good. Graham will ask this next question to you. I mean, it sounds as though, these are very malicious actors. I was certainly struck by the story about hey, if you can either pay us or you can pass this link on to others and join our little gang. And honestly, my first thought was, that's a great way to target your competitors. But considering, how insidious these attacks are, how often do ransomware attackers get caught by authorities?
Not often enough. Unfortunately, there are many wonderful things which the internet has brought us, and many positive aspects of society. The technology, however, has also made it possible, if you're competent, to quite easily cover your tracks. And the old way in which kidnappers and the like were caught would be by following the money, or they've left some sort of physical trace. Now, there's no physical traces because this is all happening digitally, so there's no fingerprints or tire marks to pursue, and so you're really limited to following the money. And with digital cryptocurrency, it can be very hard to identify where that money may eventually end up, and it can be laundered along the way as well to make it even more complicated. However, that's not to say that no ransomware attackers have ever been caught, and sometimes the way in which it can actually happen is when one of the criminals in a gang feels a bit hard done by, feels like he hasn't got his share for the work which he's done, and he decides actually to blab about it, either to the authorities or moan about it to somebody else, and then information begins to leak out. And as I said, they are sometimes, they are only human, just like everybody else who's involved with computers, and so mistakes are made. So, for instance, things like VPNs may not always be turned on. There may be one time when they access an email system, for instance, and they haven't properly covered up and hidden their IP records. The other thing which we are seeing happening sometimes as well is the actual cryptocurrency exchanges may actually freeze some wallets at the request of law enforcement as well, when it's determined that the money which is inside them has mostly been gathered through ransomware activities. So even though they've taken the money from an organization, they may not actually end up getting it in their pockets, which obviously is going to frustrate the criminals as well. So I would love to see more activity along these lines. The other element of this, however, is this is a truly multinational problem, and I think there are some ransomware gangs operating in some parts of the world where the local authorities turn a blind eye, and the ransomware attackers, to encourage that, not only pay off the police in those countries, but they also agree not to infect businesses who operate in that country. So imagine you were in country A as a ransomware attacker. You would never infect businesses in country A, but you would have no qualms at all about infecting company in B, C, or D.
Yeah, so it sounds as though this is something that requires a significant amount of law enforcement and investigatory resources.
It does. It's a lot of resources. Yeah. It's a lot of time. And whenever a cybercrime investigation goes multinational, the costs escalate dramatically. Just think about it, the time zones, the different languages, the different legislation, and whether there is willingness on the part of the computer crime authorities in some countries or not to assist you. It does inevitably get a little bit political sometimes. Naming no names or pointing no fingers at particular countries, I will leave it to your own imagination.
Right. Well, I mean, you can leave it to our imagination, but so at the end of the day, we're left, having to employ and deploy the measures that protect our companies. So I really appreciate Graham Cluley, you're sharing your insights with us today, and John Tour as well in explaining how the Cloudian solutions address these issues. So we are rapidly approaching the top of the hour. I hope everybody has enjoyed the webcast, and if you'd like to pass the link on to colleagues and share it, it will be available on demand within about 48 hours from now. And if you'd like to get more information about our sponsors, you can hit the related resources widget on your console. And with that, I'm going to thank our sponsor, Cloudian, once again. I want to thank Graham Cluley and John Tour for sharing their expertise with us. My name is Michael Steinhardt for Red Ventures and ZDNet, and I hope everybody has a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.